Hey everybody, welcome to episode 2 of App Stories, a weekly exploration of the world of apps. Today's show is brought to you by two great iOS apps, Streaks from developer Crunchy Bagel and Where To from FutureTap. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is my co-host, Federico Vitici. Hi Federico.
Hey John, how's it going?
Oh, it's going really well. How about you?
It's going well. It's a great day here in Rome, and I'm just happy that we're doing another episode of App Stories. We're kind of settling on our new routine, which is going to be this podcast going forward. So it's fun.
Yep. No, I feel like we're in a routine for sure. So why don't we dive in? I thought we would start by talking a little bit about sponsorships. What do you think?
Yeah, we have a couple of fun topics today on this week's episode. But first, I just wanted to quickly mention that, like on Mac Stories, we're doing sponsorships on App Stories. So if you have a great product, whether it's an iOS app or a web service or an accessory, anything that is great for our listeners, we would like to help you promote your product to our listeners. And this is the same kind of strategy that we have on Mac Stories, and at App Stories we want to follow the same sponsorship policy, and we want to promote good apps and great services. And we detailed right, John, we detailed all of the sponsorship policy, our approach to sponsorships on Mac Stories a few weeks ago.
Right.
And we're just going to follow the same strategy here at App Stories.
Right. And what we've tried to do is there's going to be one or two sponsorships in most episodes. When there are two, one of them is going to be a shorter one. And the purpose behind the shorter one is we're trying to create a sponsorship that's a little more affordable for smaller indie developers and that sort of thing. And because we'd really like to get as many people and broad a spectrum of products and services and things involved in App Stories as we possibly can.
Right. So if you have a great iOS app or a great web service, great product that you think our audience will be interested in, get in touch. There's going to be links in the show notes, which people, by the way, can find at appstories.net/episodes/ in this case 2, or any other number of the episode you're currently listening to. So John, I thought it would be fun to sort of discuss how we set up our iOS devices, the apps that we recommend that people install as soon as they set up an iPhone or an iPad. And also I wanted to discuss our strategy with iOS updates every year. Do we start fresh, or do we restore from a backup? And do we have other tips and tricks for a smooth, easy, and yet flexible iOS setup? And I thought we could start by talking about how many apps do we have installed on our devices, because I know you have a little bit of a problem.
Yes. I'm afraid this is going to turn into something of an intervention about John's app habit, because I didn't realize how different you and I are in terms of what's on our phones. But it's a good way to kind of create a context for the conversation so people kind of know where we're coming from. Because I don't think that you and I probably are like a lot of people in the way we use our phones, but in some respects we aren't, but in other ways we absolutely are. So giving that context, I think, will help people understand why we approach setting up a new iPhone or iPad the way we do.
So for context, I think I'm a little particular about the kind of setup that I want to have, especially on my phone. I really dislike having more than two pages of apps on my phone. I try to keep it always down to 2 pages. So my main home screen, where my most used apps are, and the second page where it's a mix of other apps and folders, for example. Lately, some apps that I've been trying for Mac Stories and for Club Mac Stories have been slipping onto page 3, but I do a regular cleanup of my home screens, both on the iPhone and the iPad. So right now, I think I have between 100 and 120 apps on my devices, and I tend to organize them with this system. On the first page of the home screen is just apps, no folders, because I want to have quick access to the apps that I use every day. And on the second page, there's some folders for games, for utilities, for travel, which is an essential folder for me when I travel, for example, to WWDC. I need to keep all of my travel apps together. But I do this cleanup regularly. I just spend 20 minutes with my iPhone and my iPad in front of me. I look at apps that I don't use anymore and I just delete them. Maybe I perform a backup of their database to Dropbox or iCloud or whatever, and then I delete them. Because I really dislike the idea of having all of these icons, having all of these apps. And it's not just about storage on my devices. It's just a mental order of having these icons clutter my home screen pages. So I tend to follow this approach maybe once a month, I want to say, I just go in there and I clean up everything that's been accumulated that I don't use anymore. It's been especially a problem with the iMessage App Store because I just have so many icons for iMessage apps and stickers that are not just stickers but also apps. But I think I'll manage to get down to 2 pages again. Now, John, what have you done? Because I'm looking at our notes and there's something wrong here, I think.
Yes. I do not clean up my phone. Ever. No, it's not true that it's never. I do clean it up, but I do it when I set up a new device, which is obviously different from you because you're doing it every month or so. I have 537 apps on my iPhone right now.
Oh, man. Why?
And about 300 on my iPad. So it's not completely chaos. It's a little bit of chaos. My organization is somewhat similar to yours. The first page is really everything that's essential. It's everything I'm using, for writing and dealing with Club Mac stories and all those things. And usually the bottom row, I will have, I try to keep it open and then put down there maybe a couple of things that I'm testing at the time.
You're one of those people with the empty bottom row.
Well, it's rarely empty because I use it more as the place to put things that I'm testing out, because otherwise, if they're somewhere buried among the other 537 apps, I have a hard time finding it. And I forget about it and I just don't use it enough. So if it's on the first page, I see it and I use it more often. So that's at least the thinking behind it. The second page is lesser used apps, utilities. The phone app is over there, contacts, a bunch of other things that I don't use quite as frequently. Beyond that, there's a couple more pages. One is a bunch of apps that have caught my eye and I want to try them out, but I haven't really gotten around to it yet. And then just a bunch of folders full of hundreds of apps that I probably should delete, probably at least 90% of them.
So beyond page 2 lies the problem.
Yes, absolutely.
Which is all of those other apps that you need to sometime maybe get around to trying or deleting.
Yeah, I think part of the problem is that, it's my hesitation is that once I delete it, how do I find it again? When you have, years and years of purchase history, it can be hard to, unless you remember the exact name, it can be hard to find something again. And maybe you didn't try it as much as you would have liked. And I always figure someday I might get back around to doing it. But that's, I think, where the hesitation comes from.
That is a good point, especially when I set up an iOS device and I open the App Store app and I go to the purchased section.
Right.
I re-download all of my previous apps because I remember their names, right? So it's easy if you remember the name to just search for it and hit the download button. But there's no filters. There's no way to say, okay, show me in my purchased history all of the, for example, text editors or all of my Twitter apps that I downloaded in 9 years of App Store. So I do understand your problem. I still think you should fix it, though.
Yes. It's now in my to-doist list to do someday when I have some time. So I think I'll do that.
Perfect.
Thanks to Streaks for sponsoring App Stories. I'm excited to have Streaks as one of our first sponsors because it's also one of the first reviews that I wrote for Mac Stories. I love this app. The magic of Streaks is that it makes forming new habits super easy. Crunchy Bagel, the maker of Streaks, has built a beautifully designed iOS and watchOS app that makes tracking activities fast and simple. Maybe you want to exercise more, read a certain number of minutes a day, eat healthy meals, write 1,000 words in your journal each day, or something else. Streaks can help with its clear, intuitive interface. It's easy to go overboard with good intentions when you're trying to start a good habit. You're better off picking just a handful of things and starting with those. Streaks understands this and only displays 6 habits at a time. Once you feel a habit has been formed, you can move on and add a new one. Tracking is simple. Through 3D shortcuts on the Apple Watch app or the iOS app itself, you're never more than a tap or two away from your data or recording your progress. Streaks works with the Health app too. So if you're tracking something that can be tracked by your iPhone or Apple Watch, the process is wholly automated. The ease with which you can track habits is the secret sauce of Streaks. Forming new habits is hard. The app you use to track them shouldn't make it harder, which is exactly why you should download Streaks from the App Store and give it a try. Thanks again to Streaks for supporting App Stories.
So, I mentioned setting up an iOS device from scratch. And I want to talk about this by the end of this segment. But before we do that, I want to say that the very first app that I download every time I set up an iPhone or an iPad with a clean installation of iOS is Dropbox. And the reason for this is I keep all of my most important stuff in Dropbox. It's work documents, it is folders for projects that I'm collaborating with someone else, such as our App Stories folder in Dropbox. And in general, I feel like Dropbox is the backbone of a lot of the apps that I use. They rely on Dropbox for syncing their libraries and their documents. And to keep the Dropbox app installed means when I download one of those apps, it's easy to say authenticate with Dropbox and iOS just launches the Dropbox app. If you don't have the Dropbox app installed, you're gonna get taken to Safari or you'll have to type in your password manually. I don't want to do that. So I download the Dropbox app, I authenticate with my account, and I should say Dropbox, now you could substitute this for any other file manager that lives in the cloud. Maybe you use iCloud Drive, maybe you use OneDrive or Google Drive. A lot of drives, really, when you think about it. But the idea is, once you have a system where you keep all of your files and the same system that maybe provides syncing features to apps, you probably want to download that app first. The only problem for me here is this one. Dropbox and iCloud are the two only passwords that I remember. And of course, also the password for 1Password. But in terms of web services, Dropbox and iCloud are the passwords that I remember by memory. But the thing is, I activated the two-factor or two-step verification for Dropbox. So the code to authenticate with Dropbox lives in 1Password, but 1Password syncs with Dropbox. You see what the problem is here?
Yes.
So when I set up an iOS device for the first time, I need to make sure that I have a second device where I can open 1Password and copy the code. Otherwise, no Dropbox and no code, and all of this idea just doesn't work. So yeah, I guess I do have to use two devices.
Yeah, well, one solution for that would be to move to their cloud-based service for 1Password, right? Because then you could just use Safari and log into 1Password and find it that way. That would reduce the number of devices you need.
It's actually a great point. Yeah, you can find solutions for other people's problems.
Yeah, yes, I can. Just not my own, right?
So what do you think of starting fresh with iOS devices? How's your approach? Do you also install Dropbox? Because I know you use Dropbox, right?
Oh yeah, I use Dropbox a lot, and my approach is almost identical to yours. I do install Dropbox right away and 1Password because so many things are stored in there that I need to, use the passwords for to log in. I do it, I think, mainly because I do have an app problem and I don't clean them up like you do. So what I will do is I start off fresh, and I know the apps that I use day in and day out, and I'll install those first. My first page is usually full of all those apps, and then I don't install much more. I just, as I need them or as I come across them, I will go back and find them or download them and take it from there. So it's just kind of a way of cleaning house at the beginning of a new device.
Mm-hmm. And we're both mentioning 1Password, and I just wanted to say it is, I think, for both of us, an essential service to get all of our most important secure information together in a single private space. Personally, I keep logins, secure notes, the authentication codes for web services all together in 1Password. I've been using 1Password since 2008 or 9. I think it was one of the very first apps that I bought from the App Store, and their extension on iOS is just phenomenal. You can log into web services using apps and the 1Password extension. Also, the same extension, you can use it in Safari to generate more complex passwords than the ones that Safari automatically suggests for you. So I just love 1Password, and you have a good point when you say I should probably finally move to their own proprietary web service so I don't rely on Dropbox anymore. I've been waiting, kind of taking a wait and see approach for the 1Password service because I wanted to see how it went, but I know a lot of people are actually very happy both with the 1Password for teams, but what I'm considering is the 1Password for families service, which allows you to share a vault with multiple members of your family. So I should probably move to that. Yeah, 1Password, I just love the app so much.
Yeah, I do too. I think the one thing that I would love to see with 1Password is for some sort of way to clean house within 1Password, because I do have a lot of old logins in there that are for defunct services that I don't use anymore.
Yes.
And it has a good process for updating when you change your password, updating an existing login that's in their database. But if there's something you just haven't used in 2 years, it just sits there forever unless you come across it and then say, oh, I had to delete this because I'm not using, TalkShow anymore, for instance.
So we both download Dropbox. We download 1Password. What's the other stuff that you download as soon as you set up an iOS device?
It's a combination of two different kinds of apps. The first are communication and collaboration apps, and a lot of these are things that we use at Mac Stories. There's things like Slack, Airmail, Trello, and Tweetbot, right? Those are the main communication and collaboration apps that I would download. And then this other ones are more the tools for getting the work done. Ulysses, Working Copy, Workflow, Todoist, those kind of things. How about you?
Well, Workflow, of course, and the other apps that you mentioned, all of them. I guess we have a very similar setup. But I also want to mention the Moves app. Now, this app was purchased by Facebook many years ago, and it's still around. It's still on the App Store. It doesn't receive many updates, but it still works. Moves is a location tracking app. It monitors your location in the background all the time, and it assembles this collection of all the places you've visited. Uses your iPhone's GPS and other data from Facebook's points of interest, for example, to create this collection of here's where you went, here's how much time you spent at a restaurant, for example. And the reason I still use Moves, even if I know there are alternatives, is Moves integrates with Gyroscope, which is, last week's sponsor and just an app that we both love. I use Gyroscope, I'm a pro user. And using the Moves integration, you can see alongside the fitness and health data from Gyroscope, you can also correlate that data with locations from Moves. So you can see, for example, I walked 2 miles when I was on vacation in Paris, for example. So that's useful data to me, and the integration, because Moves has an API, is very convenient. So Moves, when I set up my iPhone from scratch, I just download it because I want to make sure that it's monitoring my location. And all the other apps really primarily tends to revolve around Workflow and Tweetbot and my RSS service, so I can keep an eye on the news. But mostly it's kind of similar to yours.
Yeah, I started using Moves too. I used that app very early on when it first came out, and then I didn't use it for several years until I started using Gyroscope, and I do like how it integrates with Gyroscope. It's really neat to just kind of go into Gyroscope and see how your step counts and everything correlate to where you are, and have that beautiful map that they have on their website or in the app show you where you've been.
John, people expect from us some tips and tricks.
Yep.
Because of course they do. And I'm going to go with this one. Enable iCloud Keychain to sync your Safari passwords. Now, I know that I just mentioned 1Password, but there is a conveniency to be able to save a password in Safari's own keychain that uses iCloud to make it propagate across devices. So when you're using Safari, if you enable iCloud Keychain in the iCloud settings, you can just bring in all of your passwords for things like Facebook and Twitter, so that you don't need to copy and paste or to bring up the 1Password extension again. It just works automatically. And the best part of the iCloud Keychain and Safari integration is there's an autofill API for developers. So if you download an app that supports this feature, such as the Excellent Deliveries, for example, it's a package monitoring app, it can fetch your login from Safari and it can authenticate you without even needing to bring up the 1Password extension. So it's this twofold system of using 1Password as the database, as the utility that generates the passwords, that holds everything together, but also iCloud Keychain and Safari for quick autofill and for app integration on iOS, and in general to make the passwords available almost invisibly, because you don't see any progress bar or anything. It just works in the background on all of my devices.
All right. They make a good combination, because you mentioned Deliveries, which has great implementation of this sort of thing, but not all developers do that. And when they don't, you always have 1Password to fall back on and just open up the app and find your passwords that way.
Do you use two-factor authentication?
Yes, I do. It creates a little extra friction in logging in, but I think the safety and the security that you get from it is well worth the extra effort of going through the process of entering in the code.
It does, because it's a more complex, but also a more elegant system than Apple's old two-step verification. So this works with your Apple ID, and it allows you to authenticate by enabling a second factor. The second factor could be a 6-digit code that you receive on other devices, and also a confirmation dialog that pops up on iOS, and it shows you a map preview that says someone's trying to log into your Apple ID from Rome, Italy. And if I know it's me, well, yeah, I just confirm. If it's someone else, then probably I have a problem because there's someone trying to log into my iCloud account. But definitely, if you don't use two-factor authentication, now's the time to switch. If you're still stuck on the old two-step verification, there's an excellent tutorial by 6colors that came out last year, and I keep this one bookmarked because anytime someone asks me, what is two-factor authentication? Why do I need it? I just send them the link to 6colors. So that's convenient. Can you think of any other tips for... I have a good one. If you set up an iOS device for the first time, at least the first couple of nights, try to keep your iPhone plugged into the charger, connected to Wi-Fi, because it's doing the initial processing for stuff like machine learning in photos, or re-uploading or re-downloading all of your photo library entries. So I would suggest the first couple of days, there's some indexing going on, some processing behind the scenes. Keep your iPhone charging and keep it connected to Wi-Fi.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. What's unfortunate is that there's no status bar as to, is it done or not?
Yeah.
And I think it would be nice if Apple added that. I know maybe that's a little geeky, but it really, how long you should be doing this, plugging it in at night, really depends on, how big is your photo library, how many apps do you have on your device. It can be anywhere from just that first overnight charging to get it finished, or it could take, I've had situations where it looked like it was still doing it, 3-4 days in.
Right. Final tip, I want to say, I'm a huge Spotlight user on iOS. I search for things all the time, but the only way for me to make this usable is to clean up. You see, I'm a big fan of cleaning up things on iOS, is to clean up the apps that are able to put results into Spotlight. I don't want to search for something and get a list of 50 results. I just want the most relevant ones. And the way to do this is to go into the settings and into the Spotlight settings and disable apps that you don't want to see in there. So when I'm searching for a message that I know I sent John, I just get a list of messages. Or if I'm looking for a document from PDF Expert, I can quickly find it. I think it's disabling sources in Spotlight is a good way to make Spotlight faster. You don't want to see a name of a game, for example, in Spotlight, especially if you use iOS devices for work. Maybe you take a different approach than mine. Maybe you do want to find every single app on your device. But I guess if you're like someone like John that has 1,000 apps, do you really want to see every single one? I don't know. I'm leaving that up to listeners to decide.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting tip. I've actually never thought to do that. What kind of things do you turn off? Is it like games or?
Games for sure, and utilities. If I know I have a utilities folder and that I'm going to look for it, I don't want their app names to clutter my list of results. I can't think of any specific examples, but in my experience, if you do disable some apps, it's faster to remove a lot of clutter from the results. So like if I'm searching for currency, for example, I don't get a list of currency converters. I just get my workflow for converting currencies. So it's a way to prioritize by disabling app names and by disabling results from apps that I know I'm just going to launch manually.
Right. Now that makes a lot of sense because for that sort of search what you want the result to be.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. Okay. I'll have to take a look at that. Our thanks to Where2 for sponsoring App Stories. Where2 finds the best restaurants, shops, and services around you, wherever you are in the world. When you're somewhere new, it can be hard to know what to do and where to go. Where2 has you covered with over 600 categories of detailed entries, all easily accessible with no typing required from its unique wheel interface. For a limited time, Where2 is on sale. Learn more about Where2 at where2app.com/appstories. Thanks again to Where2 for sponsoring App Stories.
So some closing thoughts here, and I guess the obvious question is, do we start with a clean iOS setup every year? And I'm going to ask you.
I do. I've been doing it.
Oh, you still do?
Yeah, I still do it, and as I said, I think it's largely because I don't do the kind of periodic cleanup that you do. I use it as a way to start fresh and just install my core apps and then install new ones as I need them. So that way, I get rid of all 500 and I maybe start with 20 or 30 and slowly build from there.
That makes sense, especially if you don't do the periodic management.
Right.
I've been an advocate for clean installations of iOS for years, but what I've discovered, and this sort of dawned on me, I didn't actually realize it until I was thinking about this. I haven't done this manual iOS, the fresh installation on my iPad Pro for almost 2 years, since the first iPad Pro came out in November 2015. I'm still running the same installation of iOS. I haven't done a fresh install on my iPad since I got it, the original iPad Pro. I just updated it to iOS 10, and I guess I will update it to iOS 11 when it comes out. On my iPhone, I used to do it until last year, but then when I got the iPhone 7, I didn't do a clean install, and especially when I moved from the iPhone 7 to the iPhone 7 Plus, for a period of time I used the small phone last year.
Right.
I didn't do the fresh installation. I just restored from a backup. And to my surprise, it's become actually kind of decent. It could be better. It's not as smooth as I think other solutions like the Google Restore on Android, but it works. It pulls your iCloud settings, it re-downloads apps, it puts them on the home screen with the same placement, and for the most part, it works. There are some downsides, like you need to wait for all apps to finish downloading, but for the most part, it kind of works. So I think I don't know. Maybe I've become the person who never does the clean installation anymore.
Well, I'll tell you, you don't want to do that restore from backup if you have over 500 apps on your phone, because it will take forever.
That's right.
That's
right.
probably why I don't do it largely, as well as just as cleaning it up. It takes absolutely forever. But you're right. There are a lot of advantages in terms of your credentials on iCloud and that sort of thing, because my iCloud setup is a little weird, and I seem to screw it up every year when I do a fresh install, because I go way back to when I have two different iCloud IDs, one that's for the store and one that's for everything else.
Yeah, me too.
And part of that is because of the way families were handled for a long time. Now I do the family sharing thing.
Yeah.
I don't need that quite as much as I used to, but I've got kind of that historical cruft of having two different IDs, and so I have to kind of make sure that I'm logged into the right thing in the right place, and iMessages are taken care of correctly and all that sort of thing.
Yeah. And as for the fresh install, there's a common knowledge that it's a way to make iOS devices feel faster when you're just starting over. And it's not just about the cleanup or I have too many apps, I want to start over and just download the ones that I really need. It is a sort of a hardcore solution to the problem of I need to delete some app caches. So the cache of an app that is, you don't actually manage the cache, it just happens on iOS, and there's no unified system-wide solution to say, I want to get rid of all of these caches for apps that are storing data for offline usage, for example. And until recently, apps like Dropbox, for example, they didn't have a way to manually delete your cache. So the only way was to delete the app and reinstall it. And so, of course, if you apply this problem to 200 apps, you can see how it's easier to just say, well, I just want to reinstall iOS from scratch. But lately, some apps like Dropbox have implemented a way to say, just delete the cache because I don't need it. So maybe, even that argument for the spring cleaning of I want to do a clean install, maybe it's starting to lose a bit of strength. The main downside, I want to say, for the fresh installation of iOS is you're losing your health data, right?
Right.
Because it doesn't, you cannot just pull it back from iCloud.
Right. And there is a solution for that, which I know you reminded me of when you put it in the show notes, and I've tried it. It's to use the Health Importer app, which is a third-party app.
Right. To restore any backup, you can just individually export your data from the Health app to bring it back. So you don't need to do any backup. You don't need to do any encryption and backup with iTunes. So just use this app to export and pull it back. So that's useful. Maybe, I guess, the weakest point of all this discussion is there should be a better way to manage apps on the iOS home screen. It just feels so slow to tap and hold and move around, and especially if you have 500 apps, I can see why that's a problem.
Right. There's obviously some threshold beyond which you just kind of give up and you don't you don't manage them anymore. And I've been there. At least I have everything in folders now, so it's a little tighter than it could possibly be. But I think it would be nice if there was a way to manage these a little faster. You can do it on iTunes, but that's not a super easy solution either.
Yeah, you need to connect your device and just use your mouse to move apps around. It's faster, but you need a computer. So if you don't have a computer, you're out of luck, and you need to use your fingers on the iOS home screen.
Right.
Yeah, so I think I'm going to restore from backup again, at least on my iPad. I'm a little more skeptical on the iPhone. I think maybe I want to do a fresh install, the next version of iOS on my phone. But on the iPad, which I use for work, it just makes me feel safer and better to just pull everything from a backup, or just update and never do a fresh install again. I don't know, but if I get a new iPad, I'll definitely do a restore from backup, because just so much work stuff. I cannot do a fresh install anymore.
Yeah, no, I get that. I think I'm gonna go through my iPhone and delete a few apps too. You've inspired me.
Well, there you go.
All right, Federico, I think that's a show. That's about 30 minutes right there. We were maybe going to talk about a couple other things, but I think we'll push those to the third episode, because we do really want to keep this tight each week. I want to thank our sponsors again, Streaks and Where To. You can find our show notes, as Federico said earlier in the show, at appstories.net/episodes/2 for the second episode. If you like the show, please feel free to go out and review it or tell your friends about it. You can find both Federico and I on MacStories.net writing, as well as on Club Mac Stories. And, of course, we're on Twitter. Federico is at Viticci, VITICCI, and I'm at John Voorhees. That's JOHN, VOORHEES. Talk to you later, Federico.
Ciao.